The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Speaker. I am thankful for the opportunity to rise this evening on behalf of Saskatchewan small businesses, communities and our people against the NDP Liberal government's greedy carbon tax. Canadians are rightly fed up with this Prime Minister and his cruel tax. I hear it each and every opportunity I have to meet with the people of my riding as I travel throughout. Their frustrations, their despair and desire for a change of government grow day by day. Let's start with the facts. The Liberal carbon tax increased to $80 per tonne on April 1st of this year. If this government has it their way, their goal is to quadruple that tax to $170 per tonne by 2030. Let's also be clear, that means that the carbon tax will be quadrupled on everything that Canadians buy. From gasoline to clothing to fresh produce, the carbon tax is a punishing tax that affects every pocketbook decision a family makes. It's not a matter of a mere 3 cents more per litre of gasoline or whether the federal carbon tax charge is clearly defined on a monthly bill. Time and again, the Liberals fail to understand a very simple truth about the carbon tax. When they tax the farmer who grows the food we consume, or any product for that matter, they also tax the trucker who ships those goods. The farmers, the businesses and the truckers have no choice but to pass those added costs on to consumers, and this government knows that. That's why families are paying an extra $700 for groceries this year. That's why food bank lines and homeless encampments have become all too familiar sights in our towns and cities. It doesn't even look like Canada. The carbon tax is quite literally a tax on everything that only gets more burdensome year after year, while all Canadians struggle to make ends meet in the cost of living crisis. None of my constituents voted for this, Speaker, and that is not an unrealistic statement at all. Those who voted to elect the Liberals in 2015 were told by the Prime Minister that his carbon tax would max out at $50 a tonne. They were falsely told that they would receive more money back through rebates than they paid in the taxes. Shockingly, they are still being told the same old story by these NDP Liberals. Those assurances have been completely thrown out the window. The stories of desperation we hear from our constituents don't align with what this government says, and neither do the hard numbers. It came as no surprise to this House when the Parliamentary Budget Office released an updated carbon tax report that shows most Canadian families are worse off as a result of the carbon tax. In my province of Saskatchewan, by 2030, the average family will have to pay $895 more in carbon taxes than they get back in rebates. It's in the numbers. That's second only to Ontario families, who will have to pay $903 more. Canadians will not only have $1,000 less in their pockets to provide for their families, the carbon tax scheme will shrink our economy. The PBO estimates that by the start of the next decade, the Liberal fuel charge will increase the federal deficit by $4 billion as a result of the decreased employment that's going to take place and the decrease in investment income. This aligns with the NDP Liberal government's own data, which they shamefully tried to hide from Canadians. They know that the carbon tax will cost the Canadian economy $30.5 billion per year by 2030. This is only further proof of what Conservatives have been saying since the inception of the carbon tax. It's nothing more than an expensive scam. It is not an environmental plan, it is a tax plan. What an insult to the people of this country, and particularly the people of Saskatchewan. My province is known globally for its environmental stewardship and innovation, and we are proud of what we do and will continue to do it without a carbon tax on our heads.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I don't know where to start. First of all, my father used to live in Saskatchewan. I like it very much there. But I think it's a bit rich to suggest that they're world famous for their environmental stewardship when the vast majority of their electricity is generated with coal. It's not 1905. We can do a lot better than burning coal to create electricity. Manitoba is right next door and they have an 85% clean grid. Ontario has a relatively clean grid, almost 80% I think, and Quebec's is close to Manitoba's. Manitoba actually has the cleanest grid in the world, but it's a bit rich for the member opposite from Saskatchewan to suggest a province that I love, Saskatchewan. I've spent a lot of time in Regina. I love it there. but your grid's not clean. It's filthy. Coal is a terrible way to generate electricity, and Premier Moe, recently re-elected, boasts about it all the time. However, Mr. Speaker, I'm not surprised that I'm standing here with this member as she blames absolutely all of Canada's challenges on carbon pricing. Yesterday, the Conservative leader, the member from Carleton, who's been in this House for over 20 years, continually referred to the inflation rate of food in Canada as 36% higher than it is in the United States. Mr. Speaker, that's incorrect. That's factually incorrect. It's actually closer to the opposite. Food inflation in the United States is higher than it is in Canada, and that's in the absence of a national price on pollution or carbon tax. So we have a federal price on pollution. We have a backstop program, which Saskatchewan utilizes because, as Premier Moe pointed out, he looked at other options, but they're all too expensive. So he decided to go with the federal backstop program. Really important to recognize that when you look at the entire country, we do have a federal price on carbon. It's efficient. It sends more money back to 8 out of 10 families. It's lowering our emissions. And since our food inflation is lower than it is in the United States, it's not having an impact on food inflation. Food's too expensive in Canada. We know that, but we need real solutions. We also know that axing the tax isn't going to do it. I spoke to Sylvain Charlebois about it today. I asked him clearly, will axing the tax lower food prices at grocery stores? The answer is no, Mr. Speaker. There's jurisdictions with higher food inflation with no price on pollution, and it's simply not the case. Food's not taxed in Canada, and carbon tax or carbon pricing does not have a material impact on food inflation. One last thing, Mr. Speaker. The member said that nobody in her riding in Saskatchewan voted for carbon pricing. That's actually also incorrect because she ran in the last federal election under Aaron O'Toole. And Aaron O'Toole had an environmental plan. He was a good progressive conservative, something that these far-right conservatives have completely abandoned. They won't even acknowledge that human activity in burning fossil fuels has a demonstrable impact on climate change, our warming planet, extreme weather, and all of the challenges that we're facing. You know the #1 cause of food inflation around the world? It's climate change itself. And if we don't want to fight climate change, then we're basically going to give up. The Conservatives want to give up and throw their hands in the air and say, well, like climate change is not human-caused, it's in the Almighty's hands, and we're not going to bother trying to lower our emissions. Instead, we're going to keep burning coal to generate electricity. We're not going to apologize for it. We're not going to be accountable for our actions. And we're also not to acknowledge that, yes, in the last federal election, that member ran under the leadership of Aaron O'Toole, who had a program to price pollution, and we'll all remember it because it was billed as the more you burn, the more you earn. It was sort of like a catalog of green products that you could purchase with your points. And you got more points if you burn more fossil fuels. It was widely regarded by environmental NGOs and researchers as ineffective. It's not a good way to implement carbon pricing. However, the guy that won a Nobel Prize in economics for carbon pricing, William Nordhaus, says our plan is getting it right. We're lowering our emissions, we're fighting climate change, and we're fighting for affordability. The Conservatives can't get past their three-word slogans.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you so much, Speaker. My province is known globally for its environmental stewardship and innovation, and we made a difference at the last COP convention, much of which has been practiced and perfected long before this Prime Minister took power or before carbon tax was even on the table. We are consistently ahead of the curve and have made the investments and sacrifices to show for it, and we will continue. But that carbon tax is not required. Middle-class Canadians are losing ground, and those wishing to join the middle class have no confidence that this NDP-Liberal coalition will ever get them there. It's no wonder why this Prime Minister's numbers have plummeted, but it's not that simple. Every single member of that party and every other party in this House but ours is complicit in the despair that we see across this country. It's time for the NDP to accept responsibility for their hand in this carbon tax catastrophe, and it's time to allow Canadians to vote in a carbon tax election so they can select a common-sense Conservative government that will axe the tax once and for all.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For my rebuttal, I'm just going to read from Trevor Harriott. He's a Regina-based writer, naturalist, and grassland advocate. And I quote, "As representatives from around the world were starting to gather in Montreal at COP15 to work towards an agreement to stave off the biodiversity collapse, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe decided it was a good time to say a few things about his province's environmental sustainability and stewardship." I suppose that's the record that the member's suggesting or referring to. No matter that Saskatchewan was ranked dead last in the environmental report cards handed out to the provinces by the Conference Board of Canada. According to Scott Moe and the new website he launched, Saskatchewan has some of the highest quality and sustainably produced food, fuel and fertilizer that a growing world needs. Hey, that could be true, but it has nothing to do with the environment. A quick glance at the website filled with images of hardworking people out on the land reveals a set of measurements carefully curated to show that in the areas of sustainable resources, environmental stewardship, community support, and clean energy, Saskatchewan is rising to the challenge. However, Mr. Speaker, when they looked at the numbers and they applied some of the international standards, they realized that they aren't doing anything on endangered species protection. They're not doing enough on protected and conserved areas. They're still burning coal to generate electricity. They're not doing enough to protect the wetlands, their grasslands, or they're not doing anything on climate action, Mr. Speaker. So I'm sorry that the experts disagree. The Saskatchewan government are not environmental stewards.